In 1981, a witness told investigators of a double murder in Idaho. Near a trapper's camp, they found a game warden's body. A second warden's body was missing, along with the killer, Claude Dallas. Investigators would track the mountain man through unforgiving country he knew better than anyone. In an area known for anti-government sentiments, the FBI knew the manhunt would be difficult, but Dallas must be found.
The sun set on the Wild West long ago, but some people refused to notice. Claude Dallas was one of them. A wily trapper, distrustful of authority, Dallas typified the rugged individualism that forged this country. He went too far when he killed 2 game wardens in 1981. The law that he despised so much began to close in. But Dallas knew the land and could live off it as long as he needed to. Finding him wouldn't be easy. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. A man like Dallas could hide almost anywhere. The severity of his crime demanded that we never stop looking. A modern-day posse formed to round up the maverick and deliver him to justice.
On January 5th, 1981, Jim Stevens arrived at a friend's trapping camp, bringing provisions as promised. He fired warning shots to report his arrival. He knew his host didn't like being surprised by unannounced visitors. The trapper, Claude Dallas, had created the gunshot warning system.
Howdy, Jim.
He was protective of his compound. Dallas was glad to have the supplies. He was trapping for the winter in Bull Basin, a remote area in southwestern Idaho near the Nevada border. He had bagged a few bobcats out of season and planned to sell their furs in the spring. But he needed food before that to sustain him. Besides restocking Dallas's camp, Stevens had come to look for Indian artifacts. He planned to search along the river. In such an isolated area, he was bound to find new items for his collection. Dallas stayed to look over his new provisions. Stevens was away for only a short time. Overhearing raised voices, Jim Stevens soon returned to the camp. He found his friend was not alone. Dallas was arguing with 2 game wardens, Bill Pogue and Conley Elms.
Hey, Claude, you got a gun, sir?
Stevens noticed Dallas's shoulder holster was empty. Though the wardens rarely met with trouble, few woodsmen were happy to see them. They requested Stevens' gun, following standard field procedure.
All right, talk to me again. Are you up here with him?
Yeah. He's just bringing
Pogue and Dallas argued about the bobcat skins hanging nearby. In Idaho, the season hadn't opened yet.
Season started 2 weeks ago.
I know where they came from. Nevada. Those aren't from Nevada.
Dallas's temper rose as he fumbled for an excuse. Their argument intensified.
I know where they came from. Now we can make this easy.
Pogue mentioned a citation, further angering the trapper. Then Warden Elms entered Dallas's tent to look for more contraband. Dallas became furious, insisting they needed a search warrant.
Sir, I said stop it.
Warden Pogue turned his attention to the tent. Suddenly, Dallas was firing a gun. He had drawn a .357 he'd kept hidden and emptied it into the unsuspecting wardens. Without a word, Dallas reached for his .22 rifle and carefully aimed behind the ear of Bill Pogue. Conley Elms met the same fate. Jim Stevens was stunned. Dallas immediately claimed that Pogue had tried to draw his gun. Stevens had turned away just before the shooting began. He couldn't deny Dallas's
Them or
claim.
me, you saw his hand on his gun. I swore last time I was arrested I'd never go in again.
But did you have to kill him?
But why would the warden have drawn? And why was Elms killed? Maybe his friend had gone crazy.
You find something to cover him up with.
Fearing for his life, Stevens decided it was best to cooperate. He complied with Dallas's orders. Using one of Dallas's mules, they hauled Bill Pogue's body up to the ridge where Stevens' blazer was parked. They dumped the body into the truck and returned to the camp. Conley Elms' body was too heavy for the mule to carry up the hill to the truck. Dallas first suggested they quarter him and haul the pieces. In the end, they dragged him almost half a mile across the rocky ground to the river. That would be Dallas's one mistake. He didn't weight the body. As it floated downriver, it was sure to be seen. As a trapper, Dallas knew about leaving tracks. He must cover his to make it hard on the investigators who would hunt him. Using kerosene, he burned the bloody spots left by moving the bodies. Stevens had to help. Dallas then built 2 small fires to burn the ropes used to move the wardens and some of the wardens' equipment. He tried to get rid of anything with blood on it. Dallas never expressed remorse for the killings. To Stevens, Dallas seemed without emotion. It was more reason to fear him. Dallas had to get rid of Bill Pogue's body. He decided to go to a friend's house in Nevada for help. Stevens didn't want to cross Dallas, and it might give him a chance to get away from the killer. They would head for Paradise Hill, Nevada, 5 hours away. As they drove, Dallas tried to convince Stevens that the killings were justifiable homicide. The wardens had invaded his territory and threatened him, he said. He had only defended himself. Stevens couldn't understand how it was self-defense, but he didn't argue. There was no telling what Dallas might do to him. Near the end of their drive, Dallas apologized for involving Stevens. They arrived at the home of George and Liz Nielsen in Paradise Hill, Nevada, around 11 o'clock that night. The Nielsens ran a small tavern out of their house and were just closing for the night.
George! 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 George, it's Claude!
Dallas told his old friend George he had just killed 2 fish and game officers. He needed Nielsen's help. With others around, Jim Stevens no longer feared for his life. But what he had seen and done still terrified him. Dallas told George and Liz Nielsen he had one body outside and that the other was in the river near his camp. George Nielsen shared Dallas's contempt for the law, and he believed the claim of self-defense. He agreed to help. Dallas told Stevens he could go and asked to borrow the Nielsen's pickup to take Pogue's body out and bury it. The men went outside so Dallas could move the body from the blazer to Nielsen's pickup.
Wait a minute.
Stevens could finally head home. Dallas went off alone to get rid of the body. Hours later, he would return to the Nielsens to shower, change clothes, eat, and pack. The Nielsens would give him food and some cash. Around 5:30 a.m., Nielsen would drop him off 15 miles away, where it is believed another friend picked him up. In any case, Claude Dallas had disappeared. A few hours later, Jim Stevens realized he had to go to the police.
Liz.
After talking with George, he visited Liz Nielsen at the local hospital where she worked. She agreed they should contact authorities. They were too involved not to.
We gotta turn him in.
They met with the county prosecutor. Stevens explained that he was there at the time of the shootings, but had his back turned when Dallas started firing.
Exactly what you saw.
We went down the river there.
He didn't see if Pogue had drawn his gun, so Stevens couldn't verify or dispute Dallas's self-defense story. George and Liz Nielsen told how they had helped Dallas disappear, but they didn't know where he was. All anyone knew was that for some reason, Claude Dallas had snapped. He was unpredictable, armed, and out there somewhere.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
If Stevens were telling the truth, there were 2 lawmen down and a killer on the run. The prosecutor contacted Owyhee County Sheriff Tim Nettleton, who called in state authorities.
I notified the Department of Law Enforcement to gain some assistance because of the expertise that they could supply my department.
As Nettleton prepared to investigate the crime scene to check Stevens' story, the FBI was called in to track Dallas. Special Agent Frank Nenzel, then stationed in Reno, was assigned as the Nevada case agent.
The FBI was called into the investigation of the murders of officers Pogue and Elms because it was believed that Dallas had, first of all, cold-bloodedly murdered these 2 officers, and secondly, that he had fled the state of Idaho to avoid prosecution.
We have thick wooded areas, we have water, and we have some open terrain.
Dallas knew the land and had a head start, but the FBI had to find him. Sheriff Tim Nettleton led the investigation of the crime scene where Claude Dallas had killed the 2 game wardens. He was accompanied by deputies and state forensics experts. An investigator riding in a news helicopter spotted a body in the river. He radioed to the team on the ground, and they located the body of Warden Conley Elms, caught on a submerged tree branch. At least 1 death was verified. Back in the camp, officers approached Dallas's tent with care, on the chance he was lying in wait for them. But only pelts and skins remained. With the area secured, Sheriff Nettleton and the forensics team could begin verifying the rest of Stevens' story. They couldn't rely solely on one witness's testimony. They needed hard evidence that placed Dallas at the scene and proved what happened beyond a reasonable doubt. Investigators videotaped and took photographs to preserve the placement of footprints and other evidence. They were most interested in collecting ballistic evidence. The examiners needed to retrieve the warden's guns and any spent bullets from them. The question was whether the wardens had fired or even drawn their guns. If they had, Dallas may be innocent of murder. Searchers found .357 and .22 caliber shell casings, which they hoped to be able to trace to determine who had fired them. Although evidence had been burned, much still remained. The scorched twigs might yield powerful clues.
In the process, we found where the sagebrush had been piled on human blood, later identified as Bill Pogue's and Conley Elms' blood, and burned, we assume to destroy the evidence.
It was painstaking work, but their meticulousness was crucial. Even the tiniest traces of evidence would be useful to Idaho State Crime Lab examiner Rick Groff.
There was a number of blood spots that were collected off of plants, off dirt, around a campfire, just in a number of locations.
The one eyewitness, Jim Stevens, cooperated fully. His testimony would help the Idaho Department of Law Enforcement's Harry Capall reconstruct the killings.
We took, the next day I believe it was, we took Stevens and went back down to the crime scene and had him walk us through, showing us where Elms was standing, where Pogue was standing, where he was standing, where Dallas was positioned, and we acted it out and photographed it.
Investigators were sure of what had happened, but they didn't know where Claude Dallas was or where he had hidden Bill Pogue's body. Local and state officers and civilian volunteers would look for the body. The news of the warden's murders galvanized the searchers. Most of them knew the two wardens and their families. Sheriff Gary Amon, then a dispatcher, was part of the search for the body.
It was Dallas being a cold-blooded cop killer. It was scary searching, but there was anger there that you wanted to help the family find the body so they could bury their loved one.
Many of the searchers knew the 30-square-mile wilderness that they'd be scouring. But there were dozens of abandoned mine shafts and gullies in which to hide a body. And Claude Dallas knew them all.
All right, let's move it. We're burning daylight.
They would use high technology, like infrared scanners. But most importantly, they would rely on their own patience and dedication.
They were very long days. They were cold days. We walked, we rode horses, flew in airplanes, flew in helicopters.
The FBI's manhunt team was charged with finding Dallas. The trapper could be anywhere. He was said to know every cave and gopher hole in the area where Idaho, Oregon, and Nevada meet. So the FBI wasted no time in blanketing the region with agents.
A specialized FBI force arrived in Winnemucca this morning, 12 members of the Bureau SWAT team out of San Francisco. They'll be evaluating and following up leads from several areas.
There were about 100 officers, including SWAT teams from California, Idaho, and Nevada. It was a posse, ready for anything, because no one knew what the dangerous woodsman might do. While Special Agent Frank Nanzel coordinated the Nevada search, Special Agent George Calley of the Boise Field Office became the FBI's lead investigator.
The stories out on Claude Dallas early on seemed to be that he was a loner. He was one who was not too close to other people. He was a person who could live all by himself, could go off in the mountains and be totally independent.
Dallas projected the image of a storybook mountain man to those around him. It was a tale years in the making. Dallas was born on March 11, 1950 in Winchester, Virginia, the second son in a family of 9. When he was just a boy, his father taught him to hunt and lay a trap line, and that game laws didn't apply to them. The FBI learned that Dallas's name was already in their files for a draft dodging charge more than 10 years earlier. When he was 18, he had registered for the draft as required by law, then left his family and hitchhiked to California. Dallas found work as a ranch hand, though he had no experience. But he learned fast and soon became known for his hard work and for his distrust of the law. After several years, he moved on, perhaps unaware the FBI wanted him as a draft dodger. In 1973, the FBI caught up with Claude Dallas. They arrested him for failure to report for induction. But the draft board couldn't prove he had ever received his draft notices. They dropped the charges. It was his first victory over the government laws he despised. Dallas moved to Paradise Hill, Nevada. He decided to trade ranch work for the life of a trapper. He wanted to be completely independent. Before long, Dallas was making his living solely as a trapper in the Nevada wilds. Although he was licensed, his traps often violated state game laws for illegal bait. Legitimate trappers had little respect for his operation. Sheriff Nettleton knew Dallas's reputation.
Dallas was a trash trapper. He never took the time to go with a real trapper and learn how to trap.
As authorities investigated the man they were hunting for alleged murder, they uncovered a history of conflict with the law. In 1976, Nevada game warden Dale Elliott came across some of Dallas's illegally baited traps. Dallas used birds and animal parts to lure bobcats, whose skins brought a good price. But this improper bait also attracts animals like raccoons and skunks and kills them needlessly. Elliott confiscated the traps and fined Dallas $100. 2 years later, in 1978, another game warden, Gene Weller, came across more traps in Dallas's territory. They were illegally baited with chunks of meat and had no tags. Dallas couldn't be found, and since it was late, Weller decided to return the next day to look for him. The following morning, Weller and a sheriff's deputy found Dallas's Jeep. But again, Dallas couldn't be located. Inside the Jeep, they found two weapons, a rifle and a revolver. It was against Nevada law to keep a loaded rifle in a vehicle, so they confiscated it. They took the revolver, too. Two loaded weapons in a possibly abandoned vehicle presented a dangerous situation. Anyone wandering nearby could take the firearms. The officers left a note for Dallas explaining where the guns would be held.
Name's Claude Dallas, here to get my guns.
3 days later, a disgruntled Claude Dallas arrived at the sheriff's office in Winnemucca, Nevada to claim his guns. They were now unloaded, and Dallas argued that the shells that had been inside were spent. The deputies couldn't produce evidence that the guns had held live rounds. The weapons were returned, and no fine was issued. It was another Dallas victory. Claude Dallas was a man who rejected the rules of society. But if his rules allowed for murder, the FBI had to bring him in. Within days of the two game wardens' deaths, FBI agents gathered information about the killer Claude Dallas. Special Agent George Calley led the investigation.
We realized that to find Claude Dallas, we had to learn more about him.
The FBI talked with local trappers and ranchers. Many were reluctant to help. The information on Dallas came slowly. As it did, the FBI pieced together the days leading up to the killing of the two game wardens. In December of 1980, a month before the killing of the wardens, Dallas had made a winter camp in the remote stretch of wilderness in Idaho's southwest corner. He would spend the winter trapping alone, but for a few visits from friends like Jim Stevens, who promised to bring mail and supplies. He chose Bull Basin for his camp. It was perfect for him. Wild, isolated country rich in deer and bobcat. A place where a man could live by his own rules. Dallas's closest neighbors were miles away. He knew other trappers sometimes worked Bull Basin, but he figured he could avoid them and the state's fish and game laws. But one day his neighbor paid him a visit. Eddie Carlin owned the 45 Ranch, 12 miles away. He often trapped in Bull Basin, and he wanted to know who was working his territory. Carlin saw illegal bobcat furs in the camp. When he commented on them, Dallas said he didn't believe in man-made laws. Something about the trapper made Carlin uneasy.
Well, I got a long line out here. I run 40 traps.
He nervously eyed Dallas's .357, a more powerful weapon than a trapper needs.
Any of these come off of the
Carlin made it clear his family had trapped in Bull Basin for years. Finally, they agreed to work separate areas of the basin.
I keep my property line squared away there. Okay.
They would stay off each other's turf. For the moment, Eddie Carlin was more concerned about a couple of trappers poaching on his 45 Ranch itself. In the Northwest, working another man's land is like stealing directly out of his pockets. Carlin drove 2 hours to the nearest phone to alert the Fish and Game Department. It was 10 p.m. on January 4th when Carlin reached Game Warden Bill Pogue. Pogue was known as a strict, by-the-books warden. Carlin knew he would help him clear his ranch of unwanted trappers.
All right, look, I'll see you in the morning.
Pogue understood Carlin's concern.
That would be great.
The poachers needed to be caught before they moved on to new territory. Pogue told Carlin he'd head out right away, but he needed to find a partner. He called 2 wardens who were unable to make the trip. Finally, he reached Conley Elms.
Yeah, Elms.
It was late, but when Elms heard the problem, he immediately agreed to go. The wardens arrived at the Carlins' 45 Ranch at 3 a.m. on January 5th. After a few hours' rest in sleeping bags outside, the men joined Eddie and Joanne Carlin for breakfast. Eddie described the poachers who were trapping on his land. The wardens considered how to approach them. Then Joanne added that there was another man named Claude Dallas trapping in Bull Basin. He was bagging game out of season.
2 other guys camping right on the edge of my ranch.
Eddie told them to watch out for Dallas. The wardens said they'd cover each other. They left to confront the trappers on the 45 Ranch first. Jim Stevens arrived in Dallas's camp at mid-morning, then went off to look for artifacts, leaving Dallas alone. The wardens entered the camp to check on the possible trapping violations.
Claude Dallas?
Yep.
Come out of the tent, please. Bill Pogue, Conley Elms, Game Wardens.
Dallas would later tell Stevens what happened next. The wardens asked Dallas for his gun. He surrendered one that the wardens had seen, but kept a second .357 pistol hidden.
40-mile trap line goes down into Nevada. I've got a license.
Let me see your licenses.
Dallas said the argument began after the wardens checked his trapping licenses. They asked about the pelts he had hanging up.
What's in the tent?
Pogue pressed Dallas about the bobcat furs, and Dallas's anger rose.
What about these pelts? These pelts came from here.
No, these are.
Hey, sir. Whoa, hey,
The tension quickly escalated,
You got a warrant?
He doesn't need a warrant.
This is my home.
Step back.
and in an instant, Dallas's temper turned deadly.
What you shooting for?
Perhaps what was most horrible was the way the wardens were executed.
Oh.
Sheriff Nettleton understood the implication of the shots to the head.
That shot behind the ear was to finish him off, and is a common way of administering death by a trapper.
Clearly, Dallas considered the wardens no more than animals stumbling into one of his traps. The cold, terrible nature of the crime didn't faze Dallas. Unshaken, he tried to cover his tracks, intimidating Jim Stevens into assisting him. Then he vanished. Within 48 hours, the hunt for Bill Pogue's body by local volunteers had begun.
Team number 2 in this direction. Team number 3 off in this direction.
Elm's body had been found, and the story Jim Stevens recounted was proving to be true. The other warden was still missing. Local and state authorities used every tool at their disposal, including Sheriff Nettleton's airplane. The aerial search allowed for initial sweeps of large areas to be conducted quickly. It was necessary in such a vast expanse of territory. Freshly dug earth or other signs of Claude Dallas's actions may have been visible from the air. But finding a body would require a slow, careful ground search too, by a team that included Sheriff Gary Amon.
When we actually went down and searched for the body, approximately 50 or so people went down. We camped out near Paradise Valley, and we would break up into teams and we'd go search a specific designated area that we were assigned to, and we would basically turn over every rock and look under every brush for signs of a grave or footprints, bodies, whatever, any evidence that might be related to this case.
As local authorities searched for Pogue's body, the FBI hunted Claude Dallas. He could be anywhere, from the Northwest to Mexico or beyond. Dallas was on his own turf, and the manhunt promised to be long and frustrating. Agent George Calley and the other investigators knew that to find Dallas, they'd have to narrow the search.
We had to contact the people that he had seen in the past, and we began to get an idea of the type of person he would look up by those who had similar interests that he did. And we really concentrated on who are his friends.
Investigators knew Dallas had friends in Paradise Hill, Nevada, so they focused there, checking homes, barns, and other buildings. Agents learned Dallas kept many of his belongings in a converted trailer behind George Nielsen's bar. When agents searched it, they discovered nearly 20 weapons and some combat training manuals. It was further evidence they were hunting a man who was dangerous and knew how to kill. Inside Nielsen's bar, the FBI questioned everyone who knew Dallas. The Nielsens were helpful, telling the FBI the same information they had given the county prosecutor earlier. But others in the bar were largely uncooperative. Not many locals appreciated federal intervention. They gave agents few leads. It was clear people were protecting Dallas, either because they liked him or because they disliked the law. The federal agents weren't the only ones getting the brush off. Even local authorities like Harry Capall felt the frustration.
Some of the anti-establishment type people said the two officers deserved to be killed. They had no business being down invading this man's camp, but there were quite a few people in the Winnemucca area who really weren't too helpful, and I think our investigation would have proceeded a lot faster and quicker had they have been more willing to come forward, or if we did interview them, tell us the truth.
The fact that Dallas had a network of supporters in Nevada and Idaho gave agents the first glimpse behind his mountain man facade. It seemed he was not the self-sufficient loner some made him out to be. He was resourceful, but he was also dependent on others. The field work by agents like Frank Menzel slowly uncovered the truth about Claude Dallas.
He wasn't earning any money, so he had to have some way to eat and sleep and that sort of thing, or a place to go to hide. So he was able to avoid us because he did have some friends not only in the state of Nevada, but Northern California, where he had relatives.
As investigators learned how Dallas operated, they figured out how to bring him out of hiding. They'd make the reclusive backwoodsman the best recognized man in the West, so he'd have to come home to hide. They designed and distributed a wanted poster and put a $20,000 reward on Dallas's head. Sheriff Nettleton called it the Poster War.
I had requests from so many police agencies, all the way from Alaska, all up and down the West Coast. They were in Field and Stream. Virtually every gun shop west of the Mississippi had one hanging up. And any place that Mr. Dallas went, he would see his face. Any of his haunts, any of his friends would see it.
This would leave him only one place to hide, back in Paradise Hill, where most of his supporters were. Investigators kept the pressure on, following every lead, searching every day, and waiting for Dallas to resurface. After 15 months, agents noticed the people of Paradise Hill becoming uneasy. They acted nervous when any law officer was nearby. The agents worked their contacts and learned that Claude Dallas was coming back to town. FBI agents persuaded a friend of Dallas's to turn informant and notify them when Dallas actually returned. In April of 1982, the informant came in to talk. He didn't want any trouble. Claude Dallas had moved in with a friend, he said. He was at Craig Carver's trailer just outside of Paradise Hill. There were plenty of weapons in the trailer. Within 12 hours, the arrest team had assembled and was ready to raid Carver's trailer. They had to act fast. There was no room for error. On Sunday, April 18, 1982, the FBI made their move on Claude Dallas. They descended upon his quiet, remote hiding spot. With air and ground support, the SWAT team quickly positioned themselves for the raid. They knew Dallas was an expert marksman and that he would be heavily armed. Special Agent George Callett was at the raid.
And I well recall the announcement that this is the FBI, and Claude Dallas come out, words to this effect. And he did, he came out.
But not the way they expected. Dallas dived through the window of the trailer and went to a truck. Agents were momentarily helpless to stop him. The arrest team mobilized and the chase was on. The FBI had spent more than a year tracking the cop killer. They could not let him get away. Cruisers and the helicopter stayed on his tail despite the danger. Dallas was shooting from his truck as he sped along. Agents and officers returned fire as they chased him. He seemed unstoppable, even bulletproof. But then his luck ran out. His truck stopped dead. The shooting stopped too. Dallas had been shot. He slipped out of his truck and crawled away. Men on the ground couldn't see him through the tall brush, but from the air, Nenzel had a bird's-eye view. Unfortunately, with the agents out of their vehicle, he had no means of radio contact with them. So he was helpless to warn them.
When I saw that agent walking toward Dallas, this agent was a very highly trained special agent SWAT team leader named Dave Gillen out of Las Vegas. I didn't think he saw Dallas, and I thought there could be, I thought Dallas could have killed him right there. And it really scared me badly.
But as the agents approached, to everyone's surprise, Dallas lifted his arms and gave up. He was transported to a nearby hospital for treatment. The FBI had their man. Frank Nanzel breathed a sigh of relief.
Dallas told us he could have killed the agent that was walking toward him. And I said, thanks for not killing him.
With Claude Dallas secure behind bars, prosecutors began to build their case against him.
This morning, investigators went through Dallas's belongings looking for evidence to help in prosecuting him. Items searched included traps, pelt stretch boards, clothing, and 8 guns.
I believe there is a possibility that we could have the homicide weapon, but we don't know.
How many weapons are you looking for?
We're looking for one particular weapon.
But you're specifically looking for the gun that Claude used to shoot?
We're hoping it might be in this bunch.
At the Idaho State Forensics Lab, examiners tested the weapons confiscated from Dallas's trailer. They hoped to find the guns used to execute the wardens. But the tests were inconclusive. Prosecutors would have to rely on other forensic evidence and the testimony of Jim Stevens to earn a conviction. When Claude Dallas was released from the hospital, he was booked at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, then flown back to Winnemucca, Nevada.
When they had Dallas in custody and got back to the airport in Winnemucca, it was just a feeling of relief. Hey, it's over with. Now let's get him tried.
Authorities were taking no chances. Security at the Owyhee County Courthouse was bolstered for Dallas's arrival.
From the first day of the trial, the courthouse was jammed with spectators, split into pro and anti-Dallas camps. His most vocal advocates were the so-called Dallas cheerleaders.
During the trial, there was a group, mostly ladies, that were openly antagonistic towards any law enforcement, that thought Mr. Dallas was cute and being railroaded. Didn't mind telling anybody that we had no business prosecuting him.
The prosecution expected an easy conviction on first-degree murder charges. They had a witness to the crime, forensic evidence, and a defendant who eluded capture for over a year. But it wouldn't be easy. Whether it was the strong defense or Dallas's charisma, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury reached a shocking verdict. Instead of the maximum charge of first-degree murder, they found Claude Dallas guilty of 2 lesser charges of voluntary manslaughter. If the jury was beguiled by Dallas, the judge was not. He gave Dallas the maximum sentences he could, a total of 30 years. During the trial, Dallas finally gave up the location of Bill Pogue's body. This provided some relief to the people who had searched the wilderness for months. Still, many felt justice had not been done.
We were shocked that Dallas got away with this, because he had cold-bloodedly murdered 2 very fine Idaho officers, and not only murdered them, but shot them in the back of the head like they were just animals that he caught in a trap. And I thought that it was the worst decision. There was no justice. I felt bad for law enforcement, but I really felt bad for Pogue and Elm's family. I thought that was just tragic.
Bill Pogue's body was recovered from a shallow grave about 15 miles southwest of Paradise Hill, Nevada. And Claude Dallas began serving his time at the Idaho State Penitentiary. But the ordeal was not over. After 3 years in captivity, on Easter Sunday, 1986, he once again became a fugitive. Agents believed a woman from Reno who had befriended him brought him wire cutters on a visit. He used them to cut through the prison fence. It seems she also provided the getaway car. Dallas was now an escaped killer, and the manhunt team responded with full force. The FBI placed him on their list of 10 most wanted fugitives at the request of Special Agent George Calley.
We knew could be difficulty in finding him, that should get him on the top 10. Knew that getting this publicity, not only nationwide but worldwide, and our wanted flyers that go out.
Special Agent Nenzel welcomed the top 10 listing.
You have the backing of the entire FBI, more so than you would in just a regular case. I mean, we have all the equipment, helicopters, planes, technical advice, laboratory, SWAT teams, people that are able to do all kinds of things will help you on a solid lead on an FBI top 10 fugitive case.
The media also turned more attention to the case, generating more leads. The search was off to a strong start. Hopes were high when agents quickly located the car allegedly used in the escape. Forensics examiners processed it for prints. It may lead them to the escapee. But he had left no trace of himself. A few months after Dallas's escape, agents had a hot tip on his whereabouts. He was hiding in the small mining town of Eureka, Nevada. Under cover of darkness, Vegas and Reno SWAT teams arrived for the raid. They threw a device called a flashbang through the front door to stun anyone inside and send up a smoke screen to cover agents when they entered. Would the fugitive Claude Dallas finally be brought to justice? SWAT team members searched the house for Claude Dallas, but he had slipped away again. Maybe the agents had been in the small town too long and word had gotten out. In any case, Dallas was gone. It would be several more months before agents got their best break, almost a year after his escape from prison. They had been following another of his friends, Danny Martinez, who lived in the ranching community of Riverside, California. Martinez had a friend who looked a lot like Dallas, and he talked the friend into giving Dallas his ID. The friend was uncomfortable with the arrangement. He called the FBI and agreed to help them. Meanwhile, Dallas fled to Mexico using the ID. He cut his hair, shaved his beard, and got a nose job. He had a new look, but he hadn't changed his pattern. As before, he returned to where his friends were, as agents predicted. When Claude Dallas returned to Riverside, Martinez had the informant take Dallas to a motel. The friend quickly alerted the FBI. Knowing Dallas was inside, a SWAT team assembled at the convenience store across from the motel. He was surrounded and he was unarmed, so he could not fight back this time. Claude Dallas was once again in custody. He was transported back to Idaho to stand trial. The charge was escaping from a state penitentiary. It seemed certain he would be found guilty. But again, he worked his magic on the witness stand. He claimed prison officials had concocted an elaborate scheme to kill him because they saw him as a cop killer. Amazingly, the jury bought his story, baffling agents like Frank Nenzel.
Dallas was acquitted from escape, which totally astounded every FBI agent I ever knew that worked on this case, or any agent that ever heard about this case. It just was beyond belief that Dallas could escape from prison and then go to trial for that and be acquitted.
Claude Dallas, who admitted killing 2 law officers, seemed somehow charmed when it came to prosecution.
By this time, he got off of his draft dodging. He got off of shooting 2 officers. Now he gets off of escape because the authorities are mean to this poor little boy. That's been his defense every time.
But Dallas was defeated. He lost the year reduction in his sentence he had earned for good behavior, and he was returned to prison to serve the remaining 27 years of his term. Sheriff Gary Amon saw through Dallas's false image.
Claude Dallas to me was a wannabe cowboy loner that wasn't near as tough as he thought he was.
Harry Capall agrees.
I don't think ever earned the right to be called a mountain man or a trapper. He was nothing more than a thief and a murderer.
Following the game wardens' deaths, their widows initiated the construction of a memorial to Idaho's fallen officers. The monument stands as a testimonial to the true heroes of the West, those men and women sworn to uphold and protect the law.